call Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. After such a comprehensive contribution from the government member, I'm not sure how to follow that act. So I'll do my best to try and live up to it. So I'm pleased to be able to take a call on the Local Government Act 2002 Amendment Bill number 2 that's been presented to this House. And the Green Party at this stage, we share actually a lot of the reservations that were raised by the Labour spokesperson for local government. But those reservations or concerns have led us not to be able to support the bill at this stage. I do recognise that the Minister is presenting this as empowering legislation to address the funding constraints, ultimately, that are limiting, we hear from councils, sometimes their ability to provide core infrastructure and maintain it and actually ensure that their systems are resilient. In the discussions, though, with the Minister and the reading of the documents, we're yet to be convinced that the solution is not a funding-based solution rather than an amalgamation-focused solution. And there is no doubting that councils are in a very difficult position at the moment in terms of the limitations on their funding base and their ability to be able to secure the infrastructure into the future. But we are concerned that while this is we're being told that this is empowering legislation and it's not about forcing amalgamations, that the context of this is that this is the first piece of legislation after the failure of 3 amalgamation attempts. And that we have increasingly been hearing some quite strident comments from this government in relation to local government, where there's been I would say almost go so far as to suggest threats being made to Auckland Council that if they don't free up more land, then the government may step in. You know, which I think is clearly the government trying to distract from their own failure, and that actually the housing issues in Auckland are not a result of Auckland City Council, but can clearly be sheeted home to this government. But that actually kind of rhetoric of coming in and suggesting that central government will take over. I've heard the same comments being made approaching Wellington City Council in terms of the Wellington community's resistance to the flyover. So we are in a context where this government is not giving local government the respect that the Green Party believes it deserves. For us, appropriate decision-making, which is decision-making that is made at the level closest to the people affected by the decisions, is one of our charter principles. It is one of the absolute fundamental beliefs that guide all of our decision-making. And we are very concerned in particular at the increased powers for the Local Government Commission that are contained within this legislation. And so that the Local Government Commission with this legislation will be able to initiate investigations around transfer of functions between local authorities, joint governance arrangements, areas of common shared interest, and greater use of jointly council-controlled organisations. And I think it's worth remembering that the Local Government Commission is appointed by central government. This bill will provide for an increase in members on that commission, and while we're told that there will be, to balance the increased powers that are being given to the Commission, there will be increased checks and balances. Some of those checks and balances are that they'll be required to produce detailed accountability documents such as annual plans and reports, and consult the Minister of Local Government when establishing their priorities. So that is an accountability that goes back to central government. And when our concern is a central possibility of increased central government imposition on local government, and accountability back to central government does not allay our concerns. And that again, that we're being told that another check and balance is that the Commission will be guided by criteria which is being set again by central government. And also there's a concern for us that that this is also echoed in the CCO models and the provisions around that are being provided in the bill. So that CCOs, which is a step away from democratic control, where they are set up as companies. And the government's rationale for promoting and privileging the CCO model over other shared service models is that it's efficient and it will save money. That's not universally true, and that needs to be put on the table in the first place. But even if it was, that it saved money, then we still have to acknowledge that there is a removal of local democracy in that model, and that this bill will restrict and prevent any local councillors from sitting on the boards of those CCOs, as is very common practice at the moment. The argument given for that is that it's potential conflict of interest. But we do have concerns that this is another quite significant step in removing local democracy. This will also provide for the CCOs to be able to comment on local authority long-term plans before it starts their consultation process. So that's actually giving these company structures an additional point of influence in a democratic process. So it's, while removing democratic involvement in their model, it gives them extra control and input into the democratic process. And there's also, you know, it's been a long-standing concern about how the public actually communicates with the CCOs and actually make sure. We've seen examples in Auckland recently with Auckland Transport and the ports of Auckland clearly getting it wrong in terms of reading the will of the people. And which is one of the problems with the model, and it's very hard for the council to then turn that around. The Minister has said that, well, that can be sorted out by giving clear enough directions to the CCOs when you're setting them up. But we're yet to be convinced that that's going to do the trick. Further, that the bill provides that the constitution of a CCO must not preclude the organisation from using any particular form of charging or source of revenue. So that's central government dictating the conditions around the establishment of a CCO. And to take the example of charging for water, deeply, deeply political issue. The community I was living in, when they were talking about putting in water meters, the local response was, you put them in, we'll smash them. It's a very political issue, and there needs to be political accountability to it. And this legislation says that a council cannot set up a CCO with the provision that they won't charge for water. That is off the table according to the central government. And further, it provides that the shareholders of the CCO may impose additional accountabilities, including the requirement to describe in their statement of intent how the organisation will contribute to the shareholders and the government's objectives and priorities, so that in the structure of them, they will be accountable back to central government. And the Minister has said that clearly, that he sees that this is about getting the economic agenda of this government moving more quickly. Well, I believe that that should happen bottom up, that the councils and communities negotiate their economic agenda and plans, and that they should be making the decisions about what form and structure is best going to be able to deliver on their local aspirations, and that central government should be listening to them and supporting that. And the Minister has said that Local Government New Zealand is very supportive. They told us they were told about the changes rather than involved in any significant way. Again, another concern.
Ron Mark.